for us to effectively reduce the prison muster and to make us safer and to have a more just society where we treat each other better, we actually have to deal with the wider social structural context. Yeah, we have to, in other words, to my mind, if we really want to reduce the prison muster and reduce the offending, victimisation, yeah, we need to attend to the precarious economy. We need to attend to the absolutely shocking situation, re-housing and homelessness, the poor educational attainment, the rubbish, I was going to use another word, level of funding for our state schools in comparison to other schools, and particularly within poor communities. Yeah. Only then, I think, are we going to be able to actually to reduce the prison muster by 30%. The criminal justice sector, not just policy corrections, but all of them, are not going to do it. Are not going to do it. Well, okay, let me rephrase it. We can do it purely through the criminal justice sector, but we're not going to do it because of the political nature of crime control. Yeah? Of crime control. How much time do I have, Ken? Okay. I'll skip forward to the strategies for reducing the prison population. Okay? It's not going to do it. Okay, I've got about 4 or 5 solutions that I would offer to Minister Little if he was here. Or maybe our friend from Corrections can email him and say, hey, Juan says this, do this. Okay. So anyway, you have my call is we cannot rely on the sector itself to greatly reduce the prison muster or to reduce offending. Okay? But I want to focus on the sector itself. What could it do maybe to help? One is we need to depoliticise crime control policy. We need to mirror what's happened in Finland. 20 years or so ago, there was an agreement, a cross-party agreement, not to politicise crime and social harm. They have a cross-party advisory group, which includes external experts, psychologists, criminologists, those who are expert in development of in-community social support programs, okay, who come together, scrutinise what's going on in Finland in relation to offending and victimisation, and put forward solutions, reprograms, interventions, legislation to government of the day. There is a cross-party agreement not to do what happens here in Australia. Man, you think, I've just come from 8.5 years in Australia. Our politicians are so well behaved. Man, the stuff they say. Anyway, but you know what happened. All of us know that every election cycle, crime and crime control is one of the top 3 or 4 policy or social issues that they all focus on. And all of us, when you listen to the rhetoric, everyone's trying to outdo each other. ACT, NZ First, the Conservatives, well, do they exist anymore? No. Okay, National, Labour, even Labour, okay, come through, what are we going to do? And then every one of them is 1,000 more police, which is what we got through the agreement with NZ First. 1,000 police, by the way, I have no issues generally with the police. I'm going to say 1 or 2 things now that may contradict that. Okay, but 1,000 police is not going to reduce crime. In fact, if anything, it probably will increase certain types of crime because there's more of them around there to catch my young cousins doing naughty things and what have you, yeah? May make some of you feel, at least from a distance, safer, knowing that there's more of them around. But my guess is, just having a look, and I mean no disrespect across the audience, that a lot of you won't see those increased police. My community will, they? Yeah? And the more they police and surveil my community, the more of us that end up in prison. Some because we're bad and some for other reasons, all right? Anyway, depoliticising crime control policy, okay? That way we don't have this every election cycle, them outdoing each other, increasing prison sentences, yeah? More police, blah, blah, blah. We've been at this for 30 years. Do you feel any safer? No. Right? Well, most of you, I'm speaking of most of you, yeah? Okay. 2, my second suggestion is that we, our policy sector, especially our politicians, need to get over what I call You all heard of the term cultural cringe? Us New Zealanders apparently suffer from it greatly. Always looking overseas going, it's better over there. I've been over there. It's not. It's not over the ditch anyway in Australia. Speaking as an Indigenous person, I can tell you it's not better. I was speaking to the kaumātua before, yeah, that they pay more money. I'm well generously remunerated at Waikato, but nowhere near as, but I don't have to put up with all sorts of raru that I did there, over here. Anyway, sorry, getting off track. Well, I call what we have in the policy sector policy cringe. Okay, we need to get over the policy cringe, we need to empower the community. Those that do the mahi, who work directly with victims, offenders, invariably, I won't say invariably, know what these communities they work with require to be well, okay, to move on from social harm, the impact of social harm. That includes, by the way, offenders. Yeah? They know what's required to respond meaningfully to social issues that arise from social harm. And I think that the criminal justice policy sector needs to work with them more as partners rather than this sort of one-way consultative process that generally has characterised crime control policy development in New Zealand for 30 years. Okay, this way I think we will have a better chance of developing more effective socially grounded solutions to social harm and particularly to victimisation. And I think that this will also stop a policy process that has been quite damaging for our community service providers, and that is it will stop this silly process of the importation of interventions from social contexts that are not reflective of the New Zealand context, like, for example, what's my favourite? MST, multi-systemic therapy. My favourite, around the mid-2000s, the Ministry of Justice said, we've got this great idea. We're going to bring in this wraparound multi-agency program from Bristol in England, which is called Hot Families. And so we're going to identify these high crime families with, intergenerational offending, imprisonment, or just intergenerational social issues like unemployment, etc., and we're all going to wrap around them and give them support. Except it was really highly, it was more stick than carrot. So you'd have said, well, the police will say, well, how will this work? Well, the police will do the data, and they'll turn up and go, you're a naughty family, you're a hot family, and if you don't pull your bloody well socks up, all right, and then, childcare protection is going to be in everything. We're going, oh. You do know that up in Auckland, we have a couple of Māori and Pacifica providers, and those that deliver to sort of, I guess, poor Pākehā families actually in the South Auckland and West Auckland, and they've been doing this kind of mahi for about, 20 years. Ministry of Justice official, really? I said, yeah, you guys partly fund it. And I said, so when you have this example in the New Zealand context, that's actually, how do you know it's working well? Well, we didn't have any empirical evidence because, of course, one of the things that's also, and I haven't got it in my notes, just remembered, is missing is we do not fund to develop an evidential basis in New Zealand. We don't do a lot of outcome. We do too much formative evaluation, not about outcome evaluation, right? Anyway, I said, well, okay, so I have some anecdotal evidence. You do, yeah. Childcare and protection services and police are constantly ringing these providers. Can you take this one? Can you take this one? Right? So that's some anecdotal evidence. I would call it empirical. They wouldn't. Yeah. It would stop the silly policy cringe. We have to start believing that we can actually develop interventions here that suit our social context. Yeah. So there needs to be more trust in the community. 3. Here I get to the really political bit. If you thought I hadn't already, I'm going to argue that we need less criminalisation, less imprisonment, and we need more treatment and social support. There is a simple. 5 people that agree with me. Okay, there is a simple response. There is a simple response that will reduce the prison population really quickly, yeah, and enable the minister to meet his 30% reduction. Yeah, stop sending people to prison. All right, stop arresting people, charging them, sending them to court, sentencing them to imprisonment for victimless crimes, like, for example, a lot of drug offences. At the moment, I think the drug offending, the prison population is around about 12%. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, and we have about 5% that are like for administrative breaching, blah, blah, blah. Well, we could greatly reduce, right, the prison population by decriminalization, by treating those. And in fact, you know what? I think violence is the biggest category, around 35, 36%. 45 now. That's funny because I just went online and had a look at your guys' report today. So I'm reading an old report, even worse. Okay. Yep, fair enough. Okay. And we do know that a number of these people, these offenders, in fact, now let's talk just generally across the prison population. When I was working at the University of Wollongong, I was in touch with a whole bunch of researchers from the University of New South Wales who had just finished a detailed study of the New South Wales prison population and estimated that over 55 to 58% of male inmates had diagnosable mental health conditions. Yeah. A significant number of those were the ones that also were exhibiting drug and alcohol dependency issues. These people are unwell. And we put them in an environment that is questionably therapeutic, like the prison, in which only a very small number of these individuals will receive treatment, and then we let them out. And what do you think happens? They continue to victimize others. Yeah. So let's also think about where they get these mental health disorders from. Are they born with them? Some are. Many of them, okay, are significantly traumatized by their own experiences of, for example, in the female prison population, domestic violence, or however it's characterized or played out, okay, and including some of our men. For evidence of this, I give you Dr. Liz Stanley from Victoria University's 2016 publication, The Road to Hell, State Violence Against Children in Post-War New Zealand. And that she's talking about the Borstal system that I'm sure many of us in here remember. I come from a huge family. My dad's one of 18. Between 1960 and 1968, I was one of 17 boys born into that family. I was the only one that didn't go to Borstal. Over half of and why did my cousins, my young uncles go to Borstal? Most of them for pinching, before we had the bilk tokens, yeah? I'm not looking at any young people, they won't know what I'm talking about. We used to put out our pennies. 2 of my cousins got caught stealing that into Borstal, 2 years, raped, beaten, okay, by not only the other inmates, if you want to call them that, but especially by the people supposed to be caring for them through the Department of Social Welfare. Yep. Where did we get, when we hit the 50% plus overrepresentation in prisons in 1980, where did the significant amount of the men, especially at that time, where did they come from originally? They came from that group that went to Borstal. Okay, I actually had one cousin. He got, and this is I did not go only because I could run really fast. The police in Wainui at the time where I grew up were not very fit, and I was absolutely terrified of my mother. But anyway, I had one cousin who went inside because the local school inspector deemed that he had an issue with authority. He had an attitude problem, you know. So anyway, so alluding to the trauma of offenders is I know unpopular for some. Okay, and it generally when I make that statement, it brings forth comments from people like, "You're making excuses for their crime, for their serious crime." Oh no, I'm not. I'm offering an explanation for it. And if we accept it as an explanation that some of them are actually highly traumatized individuals, which, by the way, an extensive amount, truckload of research and comparable jurisdictions overseas like the United Kingdom and North America demonstrate, well, we don't have that here, and I'll get that type of evidence here, and I'll get to that in a moment, right? Then, okay, unless we attend to their trauma, they are going to continue to traumatize others, yeah? I know it's time, eh? Yeah, okay, can I do one more? One more? I'm going to miss out bias and racism. Some of you go, thank you for that. Yeah. I have one here, let us in. And this is personal, all right? And this pertains to the lack of evidence that we have about what works, etc., etc. The crime control sector in New Zealand needs to let go. I think it needs to grow up a little bit. It needs to stop being so risk adverse It needs to allow independent researchers, and like myself and others, see, it's all about me, to undertake critical independent research. The truth is, over the last, and one of the reasons why I left these shores to go to Australia, and I reoriented my research to other settler colonial contexts, was because me and my colleagues, people like Rob Webb from Māori criminologist from Auckland and others, were continuously blocked in being able to carry out any independent scrutiny of the prison service, of policing, especially of bias within the system, or racism, if you want to call it that. Bias at all levels, whether it be class, race, based on class, ethnicity, or gender. Yeah? Continuously blocking us from doing this work. They've been making it very difficult for independent researchers to scrutinise the performance. Oh, they'll come back and tell you, oh, well, back in 2011 we let so-and-so do their PhD research, right? But often the research they carry out is undertaken by themselves or contracted out to others, and they want control, over that type of research. Some of you, and just an example before I say goodbye, or I finish, would have heard of, I think now he's probably the most preeminent criminologist now, at least he is until I came back, was Jared Gilbert down from Canterbury University, right? And everyone may have heard of his case last year, when he and his colleagues wanted to do research in terms of around policing. And they applied to the police to actually get hold of data that they hold. Data, by the way, that's ours, right? It's public property. We own it, all right? And they went, yeah, okay. But first of all, we've got to scrutinise you to make sure that you're that you're a suitable person, a researcher. And then if you are, we'll give you a contract to sign. A contract which, by the way, they've now apparently changed, which had clauses in it like, we will get all our copies, drafts. We will have the right to advise whether you can publish or not your research, and we will dictate any changes that need to be made. Before it got that far, they deemed Jared unsuitable because of his gang connections. Jared Gilbert's gang connections were he did his PhD on gangs. Right? This is his gang connections. Oh, you're an associate. Well, and then he challenged it and he publicised it, thank God. It was overturned. And that's pleasing because there's no Māori family that I know, even the really good ones, that do not have some affiliation with the gangs. I have 2 cousins in the mob and 1 in the Black Power. I drink with them, I socialise with them, I've done research on the gangs. They would have deemed me unsuitable because of the critical work that research that I carry out, with this particular community. I think this attitude needs to change. The sector needs to grow up, it needs to allow critical scrutiny. It needs to stop being so precious, all right? Yeah, they don't get it, we know they get things right as well as get things wrong, but until they actually allow us critical scrutiny, until they actually move away from importing interventions from overseas, and empower our own communities, we're not going to reduce the prison population. Thank you very much. Sorry, I went a bit over time.
Juan, it's such an important topic. Please don't apologise. Questions, ladies and gentlemen, just a few, and Juan will stay behind to speak as well. Any questions? Hands up so I can see. Yeah, sir.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I've just got a question about the decriminalisation of drugs. He suggested that as a way to reduce the population. Are you aware of the Portugal situation where they sort of legalised all drugs about 17 years ago, and what they actually found was the police just ended up, because it's they needed something to do, they just found different people to put in? What's your response to that?
Yeah, that's been one of the knock-on effects of that policy change. That's anecdotal rather than empirical. I have heard that claim. But what I do know, which is empirical, is that the decriminalisation of drugs, decriminalisation of drugs, but also refocusing of policing. Not so concerned about Joe Bloggs or Jose blogs walking down the road, having a joint, yeah, or having a little bit of DAC on them, what have you. Okay. By the way, if you're caught, you don't get off scot-free. You know that, eh? You referred then to treatment. So what they actually did was they decriminalised, but they refocused on what we call therapeutic jurisprudence. Okay, so you will go into, you need to go into drug and alcohol related therapy, yeah. And so they took the money that they figured that they were going to save from decriminalisation, or refocusing over to social support, I guess, and greatly and significantly increased their spend on treatment and therapy, yeah. But what the police resources were then told to do was actually refocus on major importations, because Portugal at that time, when they did this decriminalisation and refocusing, was one of the gateways, okay, from Italy, from the mafia, and from Colombia and that into the Netherlands, etc., and out into other jurisdictions, yeah. And so what they've also done is that they had a significant decrease in the number of minor drug offenders going to prison, and the knock-on effect of that. Having said that, yeah, you're right, the police obviously, as you said, because this was one of their major strategies and tasks, have then reoriented elsewhere, in terms of getting there, because they have a job to do, right? And they're not going to do themselves out of a job, but yeah. So thank you for that question.
Another question? Right, have you got a big, no, right.
Hi. I just wondered if in any of your research, being a former foster parent and having 2 boys with us permanently that are Maori and Indian, so it's a bit of a learning curve with us. But my question is, if you've, in any of your research, have you determined the percentage of former foster children that are in their prison system, and any ideas on how to reduce those numbers? Because from what I've heard, it's like 75%. Whether that's accurate or not, I don't know.
Oh, in New Zealand context, okay, generally, I think I'll expand that out to the percentage in state that come from state care. It is significant. 70. I've not found that in research. It's not a research issue that I've dealt with. I would say that that's probably quite high in the New Zealand context. Yeah. But I think a significant percentage will come from the wider state care. Oh, you mean foster, like those who have actually been taken from childcare and protection services through their processes and put into foster? Yeah. The percentage would be high. I'd be surprised if it was that high. And so, but we haven't had any research in that context in New Zealand in any meaningful way. We do, though, have research that's been done, for example, on this issue in the United States and particularly in Canada. Because like Canada, like here, a significant majority of children that are uplifted, young people uplifted by childcare and protection services are First Nation. Okay, and a significant majority of First Nation adults and the correction, both the federal and provincial correctional systems in Canada have been uplifted. Yeah? And in Australia, I think I would not be surprised if the figures for Australian adult male and female in prisons in some jurisdictions like Western Australia and Northern Territory, which would have the highest rate of imprisonment of any Indigenous people, would be pretty much close to around 70 to 80% in those jurisdictions will come through that system. We call it the Paora Moyle, who's a colleague of mine, lecturer in social work and another activist academic, calls it the childcare and protection to prison pipeline. It's so prominent. In Australia, some Indigenous critical scholars are actually referred to it, okay, as the second stolen generation. Right? Yeah. So, so the answer is, I'm not aware of any research that demonstrates that in New Zealand. I would be surprised if it's 75%. In other jurisdictions, it certainly is for Indigenous people. And as to how we deal with that, I'm sorry, I think I just to allude to, well, okay, firstly, how much time do I have? Maybe we could talk about that after this, because I think it would take a really multi-pronged approach. I have an issue with childcare and protection being so easily empowered to uplift our children. For Māori now, one of the issues related to that, which is problematic for us, not so much in the criminal justice sector, is what we can see now is what Paora is also referring to as the childcare and protection to adoption pipeline. And jurisdictions like in New South Wales New South Wales has just made it easier for childcare protection and adoption aid services to adopt out children without permission of their parents. Hugely problematic for Aboriginal peoples. And this is becoming prevalent across that jurisdiction. All right? And so our fear is that our kids are so easily uplifted as it is, that they're going to be streamed into this particular pipeline. And there is evidence of that occurring in Australia. So anyway, I kind of got slightly off topic.
Ladies and gentlemen, final question, anybody? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I recently saw the documentary Celia, you know Celia Lashley?
Yeah.
Yeah, and she spoke about the need to focus on women and the flow-on effect of women who are in prison, and then the children of those women who are highly likely to end up in prison.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you know anything about that, whether that is happening in New Zealand in terms of focusing on and supporting those women who are the mothers of the future.
Poor correction is going to get hammered again, sorry. No, I don't care. Right. I think it's safe to say that for a lot of women that go into prison will generally be the primary caregiver for their children. And if that's the case, then a lot of them are being uplifted eventually by childcare and protection services, yeah. So I think that's a pretty common practice, I think, or common occurrence. What support do we give? And Celia was right. Not a hell of a lot of policy work or support for women inmates in most Western jurisdictions actually takes place and compared to men. Why? Because men make up the vast majority, yeah? And so women tend to be secondary concern. Most of our policy focus in terms of, for example, post-prison support, etc., reintegration strategies, generally focuses on men. But I guess the argument that's been made by feminist criminologists, and I think, and people like Celia as well, which is actually a powerful one, is that they may be small in number, but the fact that they are primary caregivers, etc., then the compounding effect is significantly more than the attention that they get, the resourcing that's given to their needs. That makes sense? Okay. I'll give you an example, and as evidence that generally, and of course, things may have changed the corrections now. It certainly hasn't in the New South Wales, in the Australian jurisdictions that I studied when I was working in Australia. Giving an example, around the early to mid-2000s, the call came from Minister Tariana Turia, who was the Associate Minister of Corrections at the time, that she was appalled that there was no actual in-prison, tikanga-based program for Māori women as there were for the men. And so I was part of the policy team. They said, okay, make it happen. And what do you think that they did? They took the men's one and they added WO on the front. And it was pointed out, and my colleagues in that team were absolutely mortified, all female policy advisors and what have you, to say that, and the argument back was, well, we have no actual research telling us what the actual needs of Māori or other women in prisons are in New Zealand. Yeah, that's because they never do any, yeah? But we do have, and we pointed out, we have significant evidence, especially from feminist criminological research, that identifies that women in prison have vastly different needs and social, they have far more trauma in their lives, etc., history, etc., which actually has not been attended to, yeah? And those jurisdictions that we are constantly going over, comparing ourselves to and bringing policies back from, Australia, United Kingdom, North America, yeah? And that was ignored. So that was, at the time, it may have changed now, to me, I think explains why this issue is ongoing, is that women don't really matter, because they're not generally as serious offenders, there's not as many of them, and the sector is about and I'll add on this comment, the sector is not so much about, for all its rhetoric and its marketing, is less focused on making us feel safer and reducing harm as controlling risk. Yeah? Risk to itself, risk to its budgets, risk to its ministers. What we called, when I was working in government, the front page of the Evening Post test. Anyway, I think we'll leave it there. Eh? Yeah, okay. Thank you all.